The phone rang at exactly 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that would forever divide my life into before and after. I was sitting in my cramped studio apartment, surrounded by textbooks and the remnants of another ramen noodle dinner, when the caller ID showed First National Bank. My heart did that familiar skip it always did when anything finance-related came up. Being a broke college student will do that to you. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Miss Scarlett Chen? The voice was professional, but carried an undertone I couldn't quite place. This is Margaret Sullivan from First National. I'm calling regarding some unusual activity on your college savings account. I straightened in my chair, suddenly alert. Unusual activity? What do you mean? Well, there was a large withdrawal made yesterday, $38,000. The entire balance of your account was transferred to another account holder. The words hit me like ice water. $38,000. Gone. That was 4 years of my life, every birthday gift from grandparents, every summer job paycheck, every penny I'd saved since I was 14 years old working at the local ice cream shop. That money represented my dreams, my future, my ticket out of the cycle of financial struggle that had plagued my family for generations. There has to be some mistake, I managed to whisper. I didn't authorize any transfer. That's why I'm calling, Miss Chen. The transaction was authorized by someone with joint account access. According to our records, that would be your mother, Linda Chen, who was listed as a co-signer when you opened the account as a minor. My mother, of course. The account I'd begged her to help me open when I turned 16, promising her it was just so I could save more easily. She'd reluctantly agreed, probably never imagining that decision would come back to haunt both of us in ways we couldn't foresee. My name is Scarlett Chen, and 22 years old, I thought I knew exactly how my life was supposed to unfold. Graduate from State University with my business degree, land a good job in marketing, pay back my student loans, and finally give my immigrant parents the successful daughter they'd sacrificed everything for. The savings account was supposed to be my safety net, the buffer that would let me take unpaid internships and build the kind of resume that opened doors. Sitting there with Margaret Sullivan's words echoing in my mind, I felt the careful architecture of my future collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. But the worst part wasn't the money. It was the growing suspicion of who had taken it and why. Can you tell me which account the money was transferred to? I asked, though part of me already dreaded the answer. There was a pause, the sound of typing. It was transferred to a joint account belonging to Daniel Chen and Jessica Morrison. The memo line reads, wedding expenses. Daniel, my older brother Daniel, who had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. Daniel, who had gotten married 6 months ago in a lavish ceremony that had strained our family's finances to the breaking point. Daniel, who had just returned from what he described as the honeymoon of a lifetime in Europe with his new wife, Jessica. The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. The hushed conversations between him and Mom that stopped whenever I entered a room, the way they'd both avoided my eyes during his wedding reception, the mysterious business opportunity he'd mentioned that would help pay for the wedding expenses. My legs felt weak, and I sank deeper into my threadbare couch. Miss Chen, are you still there? Yes, I'm here. What are my options? Margaret's voice became gentler, professional sympathy bleeding through. Well, since your mother was a joint account holder, the transaction is technically legal. However, given that this appears to be your college fund and you weren't notified, there may be other avenues to explore. I'd recommend speaking with your family first, and if that doesn't resolve things, you might want to consider legal counsel. Legal counsel? Against my own family? The thought made my stomach turn, but the alternative, Accepting that 4 years of my hard work and dreams had been stolen felt even worse. After hanging up, I sat in the gathering dusk of my apartment, staring at the acceptance letter to the summer marketing program at Goldman and Associates that I'd pinned to my bulletin board just that morning. The program was unpaid, but it was exactly the kind of opportunity that could launch my career. Now, without my savings as a backup, I'd have to keep my part-time job at the campus bookstore just to afford rent and groceries. The internship would be impossible. I tried calling my mother first, my fingers trembling as I dialed her familiar number. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail, something that never happened. Mom always answered her phone, especially when it was me calling. The silence felt like confirmation of my worst fears. Daniel's phone went straight to voicemail too, and Jessica's number had been changed. They were avoiding me, which could only mean they knew exactly what I'd discovered and were hoping to delay the inevitable confrontation. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house in my beat-up Honda Civic, the same car I'd bought with my savings when I turned 18. Every mile felt like a march toward execution, but I knew I couldn't let this slide. Too much was at stake. The house looked exactly the same as always, a modest 2-story colonial in a middle-class neighborhood that my parents had bought when they first immigrated from Taiwan 30 years ago. The American dream made manifest in beige siding and a small front yard that Dad meticulously maintained. But as I pulled into the driveway, everything felt different, tainted. Mom was in the kitchen when I let myself in with my spare key, standing at the stove making dumplings, which a process that usually filled the house with warmth and the promise of family gathering. Today, it felt like she was fortifying herself for battle. "Scarlett," she said without turning around, her voice carefully neutral. "I didn't expect you today." "I bet you didn't." I set my purse on the counter with more force than necessary. "The phone called me yesterday, Mom, about my savings account." Her shoulders tensed, but she kept folding dumpling wrappers with mechanical precision. "I don't know what you're talking about." $38,000, Mom? 4 years of my life. Gone. Transferred to Daniel's account for wedding expenses. My voice cracked on the last words. "How could you let him do this?" She finally turned to face me, and I was shocked by how tired she looked. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and there was a defeat in her posture that I'd never seen before. But her jaw was set in that stubborn line I knew meant she was preparing to fight. "Daniel needed help," she said simply. "The wedding costs were much more than expected. Jessica's family expected certain standards, and we couldn't let them think we were poor." "So you stole from me instead?" "It's not stealing," she snapped back, some fire returning to her voice. "That money came from this family. It stays in this family. Daniel is establishing himself, starting his new life. He needed it more than you do right now." I stared at her like I was looking at a stranger. This woman who had taught me the value of hard work, who had emphasized education and independence above all else, was now justifying theft because my brother's new in-laws might have judged our family's financial status? "I needed that money for my internship," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "It was going to launch my career. It was my future, Mom." "You'll find another internship."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
You're smart, you'll figure it out. But Daniel's wedding, that was a once-in-a-lifetime event. Jessica comes from a very successful family, and this marriage could open doors for him that your father and I never could. There it was, the ugly truth beneath all the rationalizations. Daniel's marriage into a wealthy family was seen as more valuable than my individual achievements. My dreams were expendable as long as they elevated the family's status through strategic alliance. "Where is he?" I demanded. "Where's Daniel?" Mom's eyes darted away. "He's not available right now." Not available or hiding from me? Before she could answer, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Dad appeared in the doorway, still in his work clothes from the auto repair shop he'd owned for 20 years. His face was grim, resigned, like a man who'd been dreading this moment but knew it was inevitable. "Scarlett," he said quietly. We need to talk. We sat in the living room where I'd grown up, surrounded by family photos that now felt like evidence of a lie. Pictures of Daniel's graduation from community college, his promotion to assistant manager at the electronics store, his wedding day beaming next to Jessica in her designer dress. And scattered among them, my own achievements. Honor roll certificates, academic awards, my acceptance letter to State University that Mom had insisted on framing. Your mother told you about the money, Dad said. It wasn't a question. She told me that you stole my college savings to pay for Daniel's wedding. What she didn't tell me was why. Dad ran a hand through his graying hair, suddenly looking every one of his 58 years. Jessica's father owns 3 luxury car dealerships. He's offered Daniel a management position, but only if certain conditions are met. What conditions? That Daniel proves he can maintain the lifestyle Jessica is accustomed to. The wedding had to meet certain standards. The honeymoon, too. It's like a test to see if he's worthy of joining their family business. I felt sick. So you sacrificed my future for the possibility that Daniel might get a better job? It's not just a job, Scarlett. It's security. It's a chance for our family to finally move up in the world. Do you know how hard your mother and I have worked just to keep our heads above water? Do you know what we've given up? I did know. I'd grown up watching my parents work 16-hour days, skip meals to pay bills, wear clothes until they literally fell apart. I'd seen Dad's hands, permanently stained with grease from years of fixing other people's cars for barely enough profit to keep the lights on. I'd watched Mom clean office buildings after her day job at the grocery store, coming home at midnight with swollen feet and aching back. But that didn't make what they'd done right. I've worked hard too, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I've worked since I was 14. I've gotten scholarships, kept my grades up, done everything right. And you took it all away for a maybe. Mom spoke up from the kitchen doorway, where she'd been listening. Daniel's success will benefit all of us. When he's established with Jessica's family business, he'll be able to help you with your college loans, help us with the house payments. It's an investment in the whole family's future. An investment made with my money, without my permission? You're being selfish, she said, her voice hardening. This family has always worked together, supported each other. Your individual dreams aren't more important than our collective good. The word selfish hit me like a physical blow. Growing up, it had been the ultimate insult in our house, reserved for the worst infractions against family loyalty. But hearing it now, applied to my desire to use my own money for my own education, felt like a betrayal deeper than the theft itself. Where is Daniel? I repeated. I want to hear this from him. Dad and Mom exchanged glances, one of those wordless conversations that long-married couples perfect. He and Jessica are looking at houses, Mom said finally, in Jessica's parents' neighborhood. They want to be settled before Daniel starts his new position. House hunting. With my money. While I sat in my studio apartment eating ramen and watching my dreams evaporate. I stood up abruptly. I'm going to find him. Scarlett, please, Dad said, rising as well. Don't make this harder than it has to be. What's done is done. Daniel will pay you back when he's established. When? In 5 years? 10 years? And what about my internship? What about the opportunities I'm losing right now? Neither of them had an answer for that. I drove to Jessica's parents' house in the wealthy suburb of Millbrook, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I'd only been there once before, for an awkward pre-wedding dinner where I'd felt completely out of place among the marble countertops and original artwork. But I remembered the address, and I remembered the gate code because Jessica had made such a show of giving it to us, like we were being granted access to an exclusive club. The neighborhood was even more intimidating in daylight. Massive houses set back from perfectly manicured streets, luxury cars and circular driveways, the kind of wealth that whispered rather than shouted. My Honda looked like a rust bucket in comparison, and I felt a familiar pang of inadequacy that had plagued me throughout my childhood whenever we'd ventured into spaces where money talked louder than merit. I found Daniel's car, a new BMW that I now realized had probably been purchased with my savings, parked in the driveway of a colonial mansion that dwarfed my parents' house. Through the large windows, I could see figures moving around inside, and my resolve hardened. The woman who answered the door was Jessica's mother, Patricia Morrison, a perfectly preserved 50-something with highlighted hair and designer athleisure wear that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her smile faltered when she saw me. "Scarlett," she said, her tone carefully polite. "What a surprise. Daniel and Jessica aren't expecting you, are they?" "No," I said, "but I need to speak with Daniel. It's urgent." Something in my voice must have conveyed the seriousness of the situation, so Patricia stepped aside to let me in. The foyer was all marble and crystal, the kind of space designed to impress and intimidate. It worked. "Daniel," Patricia called up the curved staircase, "your sister is here." I heard muffled voices, footsteps, and then Daniel appeared at the top of the stairs. At 26, my brother had always been handsome in an easy, approachable way, but success seemed to have polished him. His hair was professionally styled, his clothes were clearly expensive, and he carried himself with a confidence that I'd never seen before. But when his eyes met mine, I saw a flicker of the guilt he was trying so hard to hide. "Daniel," I said, coming down the stairs with Jessica close behind him, "what are you doing here?"
Jessica looked every bit the perfect daughter-in-law in training. Blonde, polished, wearing what I was sure was a designer outfit that cost more than my textbooks for a semester. But there was something calculating in her eyes as she assessed me. Like she was trying to determine whether I posed a threat to the life she was building with my brother. "I need to talk to you," I said, alone. "Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of Jessica," Daniel replied, putting a protective arm around his wife. "We don't have secrets." The irony of that statement, given what I'd discovered about my savings account, almost made me laugh. Almost. "Fine," I said. "The bank called me yesterday about my college savings account. You know, the one that used to have $38,000 in it. The one that's now empty because someone used my money to pay for your honeymoon?" The silence in the foyer was deafening. Patricia looked confused, glancing between Daniel and Jessica with growing concern. Jessica's face had gone pale, but Daniel's jaw was set in the same stubborn line I'd seen on Mom's face just hours earlier. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Really?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the bank statement I'd screenshot. Because according to First National Bank, $38,000 was transferred from my account to yours 6 months ago. The memo line says, "wedding expenses." Ring any bells? Patricia gasped. "Daniel, is this true? Did you take money from your sister?" "It's complicated," Jessica said quickly, stepping forward. "It's a family matter." "No," I said, my voice growing stronger. "It's theft. Plain and simple. That money was mine. I earned it, I saved it, and it was supposed to pay for my future. Instead, it paid for your European honeymoon while I eat ramen noodles and wonder how I'm going to afford next semester's textbooks." Daniel's composure finally cracked. "You don't understand the pressure I was under. Jessica's family has expectations, standards. I couldn't start this marriage looking like a failure." "So you made me fail instead?" "You'll bounce back. You always do. You're smart. You'll find another way. But this opportunity with Jessica's father's business, it's once in a lifetime. It's everything I've worked for." I stared at him. This man who had once been my hero, my big brother who had taught me how to ride a bike and stood up to bullies who made fun of my accent. When had he become someone who could justify stealing from his own sister to impress his in-laws? "You didn't work for this," I said quietly. "I did. For 4 years, I worked for this. And you took it without even asking." "I was going to pay you back," he said, but even he seemed to know how hollow that sounded. "When? After you buy your house in this neighborhood? After you establish yourself in your new job? What about my internship that starts in 3 weeks? What about my future?" Patricia looked stricken. "Daniel, you told us your family was helping with the wedding expenses willingly. You said everyone was supportive." The look Jessica shot her mother-in-law could cut glass.
Clearly, this revelation was threatening the carefully constructed narrative they'd built about Daniel's family background and financial situation. They were supportive, Jessica said quickly. This is just a misunderstanding about timing and communication. There's no misunderstanding. There's only theft and lies. And apparently, my brother values his new family's opinion more than his relationship with his sister. Daniel's face flushed red. Don't you dare guilt trip me. You think this is easy? You think I wanted to take your money? But sometimes you have to make hard choices for the greater good of the family. The greater good? I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. You mean your good. Because this sure as hell isn't good for me. Jessica and I are building something here, he said, gesturing around the opulent house. Something that will benefit all of us eventually. When I'm successful, when we're established, I'll be able to help Mom and Dad, help you, help everyone. But I needed this chance first. Built on my dreams. Built on sacrifice, he corrected, the kind of sacrifice families make for each other. But I could see in his eyes that even he was struggling to believe his own words. The Daniel I'd grown up with had been ambitious, yes, but he'd also been kind. He'd never been cruel. This version of him willing to steal from his own sister to impress his in-laws felt like a stranger wearing my brother's face. Patricia cleared her throat uncomfortably. Perhaps this is something you should discuss as a family, privately. It was a polite dismissal, but I could see the wheels turning in her mind. This wasn't the kind of drama she wanted associated with her daughter's new marriage. The perfect son-in-law image was already cracking, and we'd only been having this conversation for 10 minutes. You're right, I said. This is definitely something that needs to be resolved within our family. Daniel, you have until the end of the week to return my money. All of it. With interest for the 6 months you've been using it without permission. I don't have it anymore, he said quietly. The honeymoon, the wedding, the deposits on this house, it's all spent. Then you'd better figure out how to get it back. Because if you don't, I'm going to the police. Jessica stepped forward, her perfectly manicured hands clenched into fists. You wouldn't dare. You'd destroy this family over money? I'm not the one who destroyed this family. I'm just the one refusing to pretend everything's okay when it's not. As I walked back to my car, I could hear raised voices from inside the house. Daniel and Jessica were already arguing, probably about how to handle this family crisis that threatened their carefully constructed ascension into Millbrook society. Patricia was likely reconsidering whether her daughter had married into the right family, after all. The perfect son-in-law image was already cracking, and we'd only been having this conversation for 10 minutes. I'm sure there's a next chapter to this story, but what I wonder most is what happens next for Ivy.
They'd gambled my future on Daniel's marriage, and they'd done it without even asking. The drive back to my apartment passed in a blur of anger and grief. Anger at Daniel for his selfishness, at my parents for enabling him, at Jessica for her casual dismissal of what she saw as a minor inconvenience. But underneath the anger was a grief so profound it felt like mourning a death. The death of the family I'd thought I had, the death of the trust I'd built over 22 years, the death of the future I'd worked so hard to create. Back in my studio apartment, I sat on my couch and stared at the Goldman & Associates internship letter. 3 weeks. I had 3 weeks to figure out how to survive an unpaid internship without my savings as backup. 3 weeks to either recover my money or accept that my carefully planned future was gone forever. For the first time since the bank's call, I let myself cry. Not the angry tears of betrayal, but the deep, wrenching sobs of loss. I cried for the 14-year-old girl who had started working at the ice cream shop, proudly depositing every paycheck into her college fund. I cried for the high school student who had worked weekends and summers instead of hanging out with friends, all in service of a dream that had just been stolen. I cried for the naive young woman who had trusted her family to support her ambitions instead of sabotaging them. But even as I cried, a part of my mind was already working, already planning. Daniel thought I would just accept this, that I would eventually forgive and forget like I always had when his needs were prioritized over mine. My parents thought I would choose family harmony over individual justice, the way I'd been trained to do since childhood. They were all wrong. I pulled out my laptop and began researching my options. Family law, theft charges, civil suits. I read until my eyes burned and my head ached. Margaret Sullivan had said the transaction was technically legal since Mom was on the account, but there had to be other avenues. There had to be consequences for what they'd done. As the hours passed, I began to see a path forward. It wouldn't be easy, and it would almost certainly mean burning bridges with my family that might never be rebuilt. But for the first time since that phone call, I felt something other than despair. I felt determined. The next morning, I called Goldman and Associates and spoke to the internship coordinator, a woman named Dr. Patricia Walsh, who had been impressed enough with my application to offer me the position. I explained my situation, not the family drama, but the financial reality, and asked if there was any possibility of a small stipend or work-study arrangement that might make the internship feasible. "I'm sorry, Scarlett," she said, and I could hear genuine regret in her voice. "Our internship program is structured as unpaid for educational credit. However, I understand the financial constraints students face. Would you be interested in applying for our fall program instead? That would give you time to save up for the summer." Fall was too late. By then, other students would have gotten the experience and connections that could have launched their careers. By then, I'd be another semester deeper in debt with no clear path out of the cycle of struggle that had defined my family for decades. "I'll think about it," I said, though we both knew what that meant. After hanging up, I sat in the silence of my apartment and made a decision that would change everything. I picked up my phone and called Margaret Sullivan back. "Miss Sullivan, this is Scarlett Chen. I want to explore every legal option available to recover my stolen savings. Can you recommend a lawyer?" There was a pause, then her voice came back warm with approval. "I can indeed. Let me transfer you to our legal referral department. And Scarlett, I'm proud of you for fighting for yourself. Not everyone has the courage to stand up to family." As I waited for the transfer, I looked around my small apartment one more time. By the time this was over, I might lose everything. My family, my safety net, my carefully constructed identity as the good daughter who never caused trouble. But I was finally ready to find out who Scarlett Chen could become when she stopped putting everyone else's needs before her own. The legal office of Harrison and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a gleaming downtown building, the kind that I'd only seen in movies about corporate power plays and high-stakes negotiations. As the elevator carried me upward, I fought the familiar sensation of being out of my league, reminding myself that I belonged here as much as anyone else seeking justice. Rebecca Harrison turned out to be nothing like I expected. Instead of the intimidating figure I'd imagined, she was a woman in her early 40s with laugh lines around her eyes and a handshake that conveyed both warmth and strength. Her office was decorated with family photos alongside her law degree, creating an atmosphere that felt professional but approachable. "Tell me everything from the beginning," she said, settling behind her desk with a legal pad and pen. "Don't leave out any details, even if they seem insignificant." I recounted the entire saga, from Margaret Sullivan's phone call to the confrontation at Patricia Morrison's mansion. Rebecca listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, her expression growing more serious as the story unfolded. "This is more complex than a simple theft case," she said when I finished. "Because your mother was a joint account holder, the transaction was technically legal. However, there are several other avenues we can explore." She leaned forward, her tone becoming more businesslike. "First, we need to establish whether your mother had a fiduciary duty to act in your best interests as the primary account holder. Second, we can look into fraud charges if we can prove your brother misrepresented how the money would be used. Third, there's the possibility of a civil suit for conversion of funds." My heart sank. "So there might not be any legal recourse?" "I didn't say that," she smiled. "I said it's complex. The fact that this was your college fund, that you were the primary contributor, and that you had no knowledge of the transfer all work in your favor. But I need to be honest with you about something else." She pulled out a calculator and started punching in numbers. "Legal action against family members, especially in financial disputes, can be expensive and emotionally devastating. My retainer fee alone is $5,000, and a case like this could easily run into the tens of thousands before it's resolved." I felt my face go hot with embarrassment. Of course I couldn't afford a high-powered attorney. I couldn't even afford to survive an unpaid internship without my savings. I don't have that kind of money. "Which is exactly why I'm going to suggest a different approach first," Rebecca said gently.
Before we file any formal complaints, I'd like to try what we call aggressive negotiation. I'll contact your family directly, explain the legal jeopardy they're facing, and give them one chance to resolve this privately. She pulled out a business card and handed it to me. Sometimes when people realize they could face serious legal consequences, they become much more reasonable about returning money they shouldn't have taken in the first place. And if they refuse, then we explore our options, including working on a contingency basis if I believe the case is strong enough. Rebecca's expression hardened slightly. People who steal from family members and then try to justify it with guilt trips and manipulation are exactly the kind of people who need to face consequences. The next morning, Rebecca called to inform me that she'd contacted my parents and Daniel directly. Her approach was professional but firm, explaining that taking someone's college fund without permission could constitute fraud, theft of services, and violation of fiduciary duty. She'd given them 72 hours to contact her office to discuss full restitution. How did they react? I asked. Your mother hung up on me after claiming I didn't understand family dynamics. Your father asked for time to discuss it with Daniel. Your brother's response was more colorful, but essentially he accused you of trying to destroy the family over money. The irony wasn't lost on me.
I was accused of destroying the family. By trying to recover money, they'd destroyed my future to steal. That evening, my phone started ringing again. This time, instead of letting the calls go to voicemail, I answered. Scarlett, what have you done? Mom's voice was shaking with fury. A lawyer called us today. A lawyer! Do you know how this looks to the neighbors? I know how it looks to me, I replied calmly. It looks like I'm trying to get back the money that was stolen from me. We are your family! You don't sue family! Family doesn't steal from each other either, but here we are. Dad's voice came on the line. They had me on speakerphone, probably hoping to overwhelm me with their combined disapproval. Scarlett, this lawyer is talking about criminal charges. Do you want to see your brother go to jail? I want to see my brother return the money he stole from me. If that means facing consequences for his actions, then maybe he should have thought about that before taking $38,000 that didn't belong to him. You're being incredibly selfish, Mom interjected. Daniel is building a life, establishing himself. This legal threat could ruin everything he's worked for. What about everything I worked for? My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. What about the 4 years I spent saving every penny? What about the internship I can't take because I can't afford to live without a paycheck? What about my future? You'll have other opportunities, Dad said. You're young, you're smart. Daniel's chance with Jessica's family might not come again. There it was again, the assumption that my dreams were replaceable, while Daniel's were precious and finite. The idea that, as the daughter, I should sacrifice my ambitions for my brother's success. If Daniel's success depends on stealing from his sister, then maybe he doesn't deserve it, I said, and hung up. Within an hour, Daniel himself called. His voice was tight with controlled anger, but underneath I could hear something else, fear. Scarlett, you need to call off this lawyer, he said without preamble. Do you have any idea what this could do to my job prospects? Jessica's father is already asking questions about our family's financial situation. Good. Maybe he should know exactly what kind of man his daughter married. I am not a bad person, Daniel exploded. I made a difficult decision in a desperate situation. The wedding costs spiraled out of control. Jessica's family had expectations, and I panicked. I was going to pay you back as soon as I got established. When? Give me a specific date and a specific plan for repayment. Silence stretched between us. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice smaller than before. I don't know. The house down payment took most of our savings, and the new job isn't guaranteed yet. Maybe in a year or two when things stabilize. A year or two, I repeated. So I should just accept that my college fund is gone, give up my internship opportunity, and hope that eventually you'll get around to paying me back? I never meant it for it to happen this way. But it did happen this way, and now you're more concerned about how this looks to Jessica's family than about making it right with me. That's not fair. What's not fair is working since I was 14 years old only to have my own family steal my future to impress people who will probably never accept you anyway. Daniel was quiet for a long moment.
When he spoke again, his voice was cold. Jessica's family has accepted me. They've offered me a real opportunity, not some unpaid internship that might lead to nothing. I'm thinking about the bigger picture here. The bigger picture that you painted with my money. Fine, he said, his tone turning harsh. You want to destroy this family over $38,000? Go ahead, but don't expect me to forgive you when this blows up in your face, and don't come crying to me when you realize what you've lost. After he hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling simultaneously vindicated and devastated. Every conversation with my family made it clearer that they saw me as the unreasonable one, the troublemaker who was putting money before family loyalty. But none of them seemed to grasp that they had put family image before my well-being first. The next day brought an unexpected call from Jessica. Her voice was sugar-sweet, but with an undertone of steel that reminded me why she'd been so successful at integrating herself into Millbrook society. Scarlett, I hope you'll forgive me for calling directly, but I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding about the wedding expenses. There's no misunderstanding. Daniel took my college savings to pay for your honeymoon. Well, that's where I think the confusion lies, Jessica continued smoothly. The money wasn't just for our honeymoon. It was an investment in our future together, which includes being able to support extended family members. When Daniel is established in my father's business, he'll be in a position to help everyone, your parents, you, future nieces and nephews. I marveled at her ability to reframe theft as investment, selfishness as generosity. It was almost impressive in its audacity. That's very generous of you to invest my money in your future without asking me, but I'd like it back now so I can invest it in my own future. I understand you're upset about the internship, but honestly, unpaid positions are rarely worth the sacrifice. Daniel's position with Morrison Luxury Motors will provide stability for both of us, and that stability benefits the whole family network. The whole family network, I repeated. Is that what you call stealing from your sister-in-law? I think you're being very dramatic about this. Families support each other during major life transitions. The wedding and honeymoon were important for establishing our social position, which directly impacts Daniel's career prospects. And my career prospects don't matter? Of course they matter, but you're young, you're smart. Daniel's chance with Jessica's family might not come again. There it was again. The assumption that my dreams were replaceable, while Daniel's were precious and finite. The idea that, as the daughter, I should sacrifice my ambitions for my brother's success. If Daniel's success depends on stealing from his sister, then maybe he doesn't deserve it, I said, and hung up. The question hung in the air, loaded with all the guilt and manipulation I'd grown up navigating. But for the first time, I had a clear answer. I would really send my own brother to jail over money, yes.
Just like I would hold anyone else accountable for the same crime. Jessica was quiet for a moment, then her voice returned even more controlled than before. I hope you understand that if you continue down this path, you'll be damaging relationships that can never be fully repaired. Daniel and I are willing to work out some kind of payment plan, but these legal threats are making everyone very uncomfortable. Everyone should be uncomfortable. Theft should make people uncomfortable. Betraying family should make people uncomfortable. And taking someone's college fund to pay for a luxury honeymoon should definitely make people uncomfortable. After Jessica hung up, I felt a strange sense of clarity settling over me. Every conversation with my family members revealed the same underlying assumption, that my dreams, my money, and my future were somehow less important than maintaining their comfort and social status. They weren't angry because they'd been caught doing something wrong. They were angry because I was refusing to quietly absorb the consequences of their choices. Rebecca called that afternoon with an update. I've received responses from your family. Your parents want to schedule a meeting to discuss family mediation. Daniel's response was less cooperative, but his wife contacted me directly to propose a payment plan. What kind of payment plan? $200 a month for the next 15 years with no interest. I did the math quickly in my head. That's only $36,000 total, and it doesn't account for the 6 months they've already had use of the money or the lost investment potential or the opportunities I'm missing right now. Exactly. It's an insulting offer designed to make you go away without actually making you whole. I told them it was unacceptable and that we needed full restitution within 30 days or we'd be filing formal complaints. How did they react to that? Your brother apparently threw his phone across the room. Your parents asked if there was any way to keep this out of the courts. Jessica wanted to know if we'd accept $40,000 as a final settlement. The $40,000 number was closer to fair, accounting for some of the lost opportunity and time value, but it was still a negotiation starting point rather than genuine restitution. What do you think I should do? Rebecca was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Legally, I think we have a strong case for fraud and conversion. Your brother knowingly misrepresented how your money would be used, and he's shown no good faith effort to return it. But I have to ask you something important. What? Are you prepared for the possibility that winning this case might mean permanently severing your relationship with your family? Because that's what usually happens in situations like this. Families don't typically forgive the member who holds them legally accountable for their actions. I thought about that question for a long time after we hung up. Was I prepared to lose my family over this money? The question felt backwards to me, though. I wasn't the one choosing money over family. They were the ones who chose money over family when they decided Daniel's social status was more important than my future. But the practical implications were daunting. No more family dinners, no more holiday celebrations, no more safety net of people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I would be truly on my own in a way I'd never been before. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since childhood. I called my grandmother, my mother's mother, who lived in a senior community about an hour away. Grandma Lou had immigrated to America with my grandfather 50 years ago, working in garment factories and restaurant kitchens to build the foundation that had allowed my parents to achieve their middle-class stability. "Scarlett, it's been too long since you called. How are your studies?" I found myself telling her the whole story, partly in English and partly in the broken Mandarin I'd learned as a child. Grandma Lou listened without interruption, occasionally making small sounds of disapproval or concern. When she finished, she was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke in heavily accented English, her voice carrying the weight of decades of experience. "Your mother and father, they are good people, but they are confused about what success means in America. They think success is about looking successful to others. But real success is about building something solid for yourself and your children. What should I do, Grandma? In China, families support each other, yes, but support means helping each person become strong, not making some people weak so others can appear strong. Your brother took your strength to make himself look successful. That is not family support. That is family destruction." Her words hit me with unexpected force. Here was someone from the older generation, someone who truly understood traditional family values, telling me that what my parents and Daniel had done wasn't traditional or honorable, it was destructive. Your money was your future. They stole your future to buy your brother a prettier present. That is not something families do to each other. But they keep saying I'm being selfish. Selfish is taking what belongs to someone else. Selfish is thinking your marriage party is more important than your sister's education. You are not being selfish, you are being strong. And sometimes being strong looks selfish to people who are used to you being weak. After talking with Grandma Lou, I felt more grounded in my decision. This wasn't about choosing money over family. It was about refusing to accept that my dreams were less important than my brother's comfort. The next morning brought another unexpected development. Margaret Sullivan from the bank called with additional information that would change everything. "Scarlett," she said, her voice excited, "I've been doing some additional research into your account activity, and I found something interesting. The authorization your mother used to transfer the funds, it's dated 3 years ago when you were still a minor. But there's a problem." "What kind of problem?" "When you turned 18, you should have received paperwork to either remove your mother from the account or reconfirm her access as an adult account holder. That paperwork was never filed, which means your mother's authorization to access the account may have expired when you reached the age of majority. My heart started racing. What does that mean legally? It means the transfer might not have been legally authorized after all. I'm going to need to bring this to our legal department, but if they determine that your mother's didn't have current authority to access the account, then the transfer could be classified as unauthorized and potentially fraudulent. Even if she was originally a joint account holder? Even then, joint account access for minors is different from joint account access for adults. The fact that the proper paperwork wasn't completed when you turned 18 creates a significant legal gray area that works in your favor. I called Rebecca immediately to share this development. Her excitement was palpable even over the phone. "This changes everything," she said. "If the bank determines that your mother's access was expired, then we're not just looking at a family financial dispute anymore. We're looking at unauthorized access to someone else's bank account, which is a felony." A felony? Potentially, yes. Banks take unauthorized account access very seriously, especially when large sums are involved. This could trigger an automatic investigation by the bank's fraud department, which would put pressure on your family to resolve this quickly and completely. Within hours, Margaret Sullivan called back with confirmation. The bank's legal department had reviewed the account activity and determined that my mother's joint access had indeed expired when I turned 18. The transfer was being classified as unauthorized, and the bank was beginning a formal fraud investigation. What happens now? We'll be contacting your mother and brother directly to inform them that they may be subject to criminal charges for unauthorized access to a bank account and theft. We'll also be putting a freeze on any accounts that received the transferred funds. That afternoon, my phone exploded with calls from my family. Mom was crying, Dad was shouting, and Daniel was alternating between fury and panic. But for the first time since this ordeal began, I didn't answer any of their calls. Instead, I sat in my apartment and felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope.
Not just hope that I might recover my money, but hope that I was finally learning to value myself enough to fight for my own future. The bank investigation moved quickly. Within 48 hours, both my mother and Daniel received official notifications that they were under investigation for bank fraud and theft. The joint account that had received my college savings was frozen pending resolution of the case. Rebecca called with updates throughout the process. "Your brother is panicking," she reported. "He's contacted 3 different lawyers trying to find someone who will tell him this isn't serious. But unauthorized access to someone's bank account is very serious, especially when it involves this much money." "What about my parents?" "Your mother is claiming she didn't know her access had expired, but ignorance of account terms isn't a legal defense. Your father is trying to negotiate a settlement that would avoid criminal charges." "What kind of settlement?" "Full restitution plus damages and legal fees. They're also willing to pay for your lost opportunities, including funding your internship and additional compensation for the delayed start to your career." I was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Just a week ago, my family had been united in telling me that I was being selfish and destructive for wanting my own money back. Now, facing actual legal consequences, they were suddenly willing to not only return what they'd stolen, but pay additional compensation. How much additional compensation are they offering? $50,000 total. That's your original $38,000 plus $12,000 in damages and lost opportunity costs. $50,000 would not only allow me to take the Goldman internship, but would also provide a cushion for future opportunities and unexpected expenses. It was more than I'd hoped to recover when this started. What's the catch? No criminal charges filed and a non-disclosure agreement. They want to ensure this doesn't become public knowledge that could affect Daniel's job prospects or your father's business reputation. The non-disclosure agreement was interesting. Even as they were offering to make me financially whole, they were still trying to control the narrative and protect their public image. Some things never change. Do I have to decide right away? You have until tomorrow morning. After that, the bank investigation moves forward automatically, and criminal charges become much more likely. That night, I called Grandma Lou again. "They want to give you your money back," she asked, her tone suggesting she found this sudden change of heart suspicious.
more than my money back, but they want me to promise never to tell anyone what happened." "Ah," Grandma Lou said knowingly. "They're not sorry they stole from you. They are sorry they got caught. Big difference." "So what should I do?" "Take their money," she said without hesitation. "Take every penny they offer you. Use it to build the life you want. But don't forget what they showed you about who they really are when they thought there would be no consequences." "Won't that make me just as bad as them, taking their money?" Grandma Lou laughed, a sound that held decades of wisdom and survival. "Child, they are not giving you your money. They are returning your money and paying you for the damage they caused. There is nothing wrong with accepting payment for harm done to you. But the non-disclosure agreement means I can never tell anyone what really happened." "You don't need to tell anyone what happened. You just need to remember it yourself and make sure it never happens to you again." The next morning, I called Rebecca and accepted the settlement offer. By noon, the paperwork was signed, and by evening, $50,000 had been deposited into a new account that only I could access. The relief was overwhelming, but it was mixed with a complicated grief. I had won, but what I'd won was the knowledge that my family would only treat me fairly when faced with legal consequences. I had recovered my money, but I had lost the illusion that my parents and brother truly had my best interests at heart. Daniel called me that evening, his voice carefully controlled. "I hope you're happy. You got what you wanted." "I got what was rightfully mine from the beginning," I corrected him. "This whole situation could have been handled privately, within the family. Instead, you involved lawyers and banks and turned it into a public spectacle." "There was nothing public about it until you made it public by stealing my money, and it only became a legal issue because you refused to return what you took." "I hope it was worth it," Daniel said bitterly, "because you've changed this family forever. Things will never be the same between us." "You're right," I agreed. "Things will never be the same. Because now I know that you're willing to steal from me to maintain your lifestyle, and Mom and Dad are willing to help you do it. That's not something I can unknow." "We're still your family." "Yes, you are. But now I understand what kind of family we are." After he hung up, I sat in my apartment with my laptop open to the Goldman & Associates website. Tomorrow, I would call Dr. Walsh and accept the internship position. I would start building the career I dreamed about since high school. But I would be doing it with a very different understanding of what family meant and what I could expect from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The money was back in my account, but the innocence was gone forever. In some ways, that felt like the most expensive part of this entire ordeal. But as Grandma Lou had said, sometimes knowing the truth about people is more valuable than maintaining comfortable illusions. I pulled up my contact list and deleted the non-disclosure agreement I had signed earlier. I wouldn't go out of my way to tell people what had happened, but I also wouldn't lie to protect my family's reputation if someone asked direct questions. They had chosen their path when they decided to steal from me. I had chosen mine when I decided to fight back. Now it was time to see where that path would lead. 6 months after the settlement, I stood in the marble lobby of Goldman & Associates, wearing a tailored suit that I'd purchased with my recovered savings. The internship had transformed into a full-time position, complete with health benefits and a starting salary that exceeded anything I dared to dream about during those ramen-fueled nights in my studio apartment. But the real transformation wasn't in my bank account or my wardrobe. It was in how I carried myself through the world. The morning routine had become sacred to me. I woke at 5:30, made coffee in my new one-bedroom apartment, and spent an hour reading financial news before heading to the office. The discipline felt good, like armor I put on each day to protect the person I was becoming from the person I used to be. The person who had accepted scraps and called it family loyalty was gone, replaced by someone who understood her worth and insisted others recognize it too. "Scarlett, excellent work on the Morrison account analysis," Dr. Patricia Walsh said as she reviewed my latest project. We were sitting in her corner office, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. "Your insights into their market positioning were exactly what we needed to secure the contract renewal." The irony wasn't lost on me that my success had come partly from analyzing luxury car dealerships, the same industry that had supposedly justified my family's theft. But where they had seen Daniel's association with the Morrison family business as a path to respectability, I had built my own expertise that made me valuable to clients like them. "Thank you," I replied, accepting her praise without the self-deprecation that had once been my default response. "I've been thinking about expanding the analysis to include their competitors. I believe we could identify additional revenue streams they haven't considered." Dr. Walsh leaned back in her chair, studying me with the same intensity she'd shown during my initial interview. "You've changed since you started here. There's a confidence now that wasn't there before."
She was right, though I wasn't sure she could understand the specific journey that had brought me to this point. The legal battle with my family had stripped away more than my illusions about unconditional love. It had also removed my need for external validation. When you've survived having your own family betray you for money, the approval of colleagues and clients feels like a bonus rather than a necessity. "I've learned to trust my own judgment," I said simply. That afternoon brought an email that I'd been both expecting and dreading for months. Daniel was getting divorced. The message came from my mother, written in the carefully neutral tone she'd adopted since our settlement. Jessica had filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, but the real reason was buried in the legal documents she'd attached to the email. Daniel's position at Morrison Luxury Motors had been terminated after only 4 months. According to the documentation, there had been irregularities in financial reporting and concerns about professional integrity. Reading between the lines, it seemed that Daniel's habit of taking shortcuts and bending rules had followed him into his dream job. Jessica's father had apparently discovered that his new son-in-law was not the upstanding businessman he'd pretended to be. The divorce papers painted a picture of a marriage that had been built entirely on financial expectations that neither party could meet. Jessica was seeking alimony despite the brief duration of their marriage, claiming she had given up career opportunities to support Daniel's professional development. Daniel was countersuing for the return of wedding gifts and honeymoon expenses, apparently having forgotten that those expenses had been funded with stolen money in the first place. I found myself feeling an unexpected emotion as I read through the documents: pity. Not for the situation they'd created, but for how completely they'd misunderstood what they were trying to achieve. Daniel had wanted respect and success, but he'd pursued them through deception and theft. Jessica had wanted security and status, but she'd built her life on a foundation of lies. Now, both of them were facing the collapse of everything they'd thought they wanted. Mom's email concluded with a carefully worded request that felt more like an obligation than an invitation. "Your father and I are hosting a small dinner this Sunday to discuss the family situation. We hope you can attend." The phrase "family situation" was typical of how my parents had reframed the entire ordeal. In their minds, Daniel's divorce was a crisis that required family support, while my financial recovery was simply the resolution of a misunderstanding that everyone should move past. The theft, the lies, the legal threats, all of that had been reduced to a temporary disruption in the natural order of family harmony. I spent the weekend debating whether to attend the dinner. Part of me was curious about how they would handle seeing me now that I've proven my independence so decisively. Another part of me wanted to stay away entirely, to continue building my new life without the complication of family drama. But ultimately, I decided to go. Partly because I was strong enough now to face whatever manipulations they might try, and partly because I wanted to see for myself how much they'd changed, if at all. The house looked exactly the same from the outside, but walking through the front door felt like entering a museum of my former life. Everything was familiar yet distant, like remembering a dream. Mom had prepared all of my childhood favorites: dumplings, braised pork belly, stir-fried vegetables, but the gesture felt calculated rather than loving, an attempt to recreate the comfort of family traditions while ignoring the betrayal that had shattered them. Daniel looked terrible. He'd lost weight, his clothes hung loosely on his frame, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and mounting stress. But what struck me most was how small he seemed, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with his physical appearance.
The confident swagger that had carried him through his wedding and honeymoon was gone, replaced by the hunched shoulders of someone who's learned that stealing your way to success doesn't actually create sustainable success. "Scarlett," he said when I entered the dining room, his voice carefully polite, "thank you for coming." The formality felt strange after a lifetime of casual sibling interaction, but it was probably the most honest communication we'd had in years. We were no longer the brother and sister who'd grown up sharing secrets and inside jokes. We were two adults who discovered they had fundamentally different values and were still learning how to coexist with that knowledge. Dad looked older, more tired, as if the stress of the past months had aged him in ways that went beyond mere time. His auto repair business had suffered during the legal proceedings, partly from his distraction, but mostly from the whispered rumors in their small community about family financial problems. In a business built on trust and reputation, even the hint of money troubles could drive away customers who worried about whether their mechanic could afford to honor warranties or complete repairs. "Your brother is going through a difficult time," Mom began, settling into the same chair she'd occupied throughout my childhood. "The divorce is putting a lot of pressure on him financially and emotionally." I waited for her to continue, but she seemed to expect me to respond with sympathy or offers of support. When I remained silent, she pressed on. "We were hoping you might be able to help him transition back to living independently. Maybe he could stay in your guest room for a few weeks while he finds a new apartment." The audacity of the request took my breath away. 6 months ago, Daniel had stolen my college fund and called me selfish for wanting it back. Now, with his marriage and career in ruins, they expected me to open my home and provide financial support as if nothing had happened. "I don't have a guest room," I said calmly. "I have a 1-bedroom apartment." "Well, maybe he could sleep on your couch temporarily," Dad suggested, "just until he gets back on his feet." I looked around the table at these 3 people who had shaped my childhood and adolescence, who had taught me about hard work and perseverance and family loyalty, and I realized that they still didn't understand what they'd done wrong. They still saw my financial success as a resource that belonged to the family, rather than the result of my individual effort. They still believed that Daniel's needs should take priority over my boundaries simply because he was struggling and I was thriving. "No," I said simply. The word hung in the air like a challenge. In the past, I would have followed it with explanations, justifications, apologies for disappointing them, but I'd learned that no was a complete sentence, and that people who truly cared about my well-being wouldn't require me to justify my boundaries. "Scarlett," Mom said, her voice taking on the tone she'd used when I was a child who was misbehaving, "Daniel is your brother. He made mistakes, yes, but families forgive each other and move forward together. Some mistakes can be forgiven," I replied. "Others change the relationship permanently. Stealing my college fund falls into the second category." "We've moved past that," Dad said firmly. "The money was returned, everyone learned from the experience, and now we need to focus on helping each other through current challenges." "You moved past it," I corrected him. "I learned from it. What I learned is that this family will sacrifice my future for Daniel's comfort without hesitation, and then expect me to pretend it never happened when things don't work out the way you planned." Daniel spoke up for the first time since grieving. "I know I screwed up, okay? I know what I did was wrong, but I'm trying to rebuild my life here, and I could really use some support from my sister." There was something in his voice that was new, genuine remorse, rather than just regret about getting caught. But remorse wasn't the same as changed behavior, and support wasn't the same as enabling. "I support your efforts to rebuild your life," I said carefully, "but I won't provide financial assistance or housing to someone who stole from me. That's a boundary I'm not willing to cross." "So you're just going to hold this over me forever?" Daniel's voice rose, frustration bleeding through his attempt at contrition. "I'm going to be punished for the rest of my life for one mistake?" "You're not being punished," I explained. "You're experiencing the natural consequences of your choices. The divorce, the job loss, the financial problems, those are all results of decisions you made. I'm not responsible for fixing problems you created." Mom's face hardened, the same expression she'd worn during our confrontation 6 months earlier. "You've become very cold, Scarlett. This success has changed you, and not for the better." I considered her accusation carefully. Had success changed me? Absolutely, but not in the way she meant. Success hadn't made me cold, it had made me clear about my worth and unwilling to accept treatment that diminished it.
Success hadn't made me selfish. It had taught me the difference between supporting family and enabling destructive behavior. You're right that success has changed me, I said. I've learned that I don't have to accept crumbs and call it love. I've learned that people who care about me don't steal from me and then get angry when I hold them accountable. And I've learned that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is maintain boundaries with people who have proven they don't respect you. Respect? Mom's voice was sharp. What about respecting your parents? What about respecting your family obligations? Respect is mutual, or it doesn't exist at all.
And family obligations work both ways. Daniel had an obligation not to steal from me. You had an obligation to protect my interests as much as his. Dad had an obligation to teach both of his children that actions have consequences. I stood up, gathering my purse and coat. The dinner had served its purpose. I had confirmed that my family remained committed to the same dynamics that had led to the original betrayal. Daniel was still the golden child whose problems required everyone else's sacrifice. I was still expected to be the understanding daughter who absorbed whatever damage they caused without complaint. "Where are you going?" Dad asked, rising from his own chair. "Home," I said. "To my apartment that I pay for with money I earned at a job I got through my own merit. To a life I built without stealing from anyone or expecting other people to fix my mistakes." "Scarlett, please," Mom called as I walked toward the front door. "Don't leave like this. We're still your family." I paused in the doorway, looking back at these three people who had shaped so much of my understanding about love and loyalty and sacrifice. They were still my family, but that didn't mean what it used to mean. Family was no longer an excuse for accepting unacceptable behavior. Family was no longer a reason to set myself on fire to keep other people warm. "Yes, you are my family," I agreed. "But that doesn't mean I have to sacrifice my well-being for your comfort. And it doesn't mean I have to pretend that what happened 6 months ago was acceptable just because it's inconvenient to remember now." The drive back to my apartment gave me time to process the dinner and my reactions to it. I felt sad, but it was a clean sadness rather than the complicated grief I'd experienced during the legal proceedings. I was sad that my family had chosen their path, but I was no longer confused about my own. Monday morning brought a new project at Goldman & Associates, a comprehensive market analysis for a chain of educational service companies. As I dove into the research, I found myself thinking about the difference between education and learning. Education was what happened in classrooms and from textbooks. Learning was what happened when life forced you to reconsider everything you thought you knew about yourself and the people around you. The past year had been an intensive learning experience, more valuable than any degree or certification I could have earned. I'd learned that love without respect was manipulation. I'd learned that family dynamics built on inequality and sacrifice were ultimately unsustainable. I'd learned that fighting for yourself wasn't selfish. It was essential for becoming the kind of person who could contribute meaningfully to the world. Dr. Walsh stopped by my desk that afternoon with news that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. "There's a position opening up in our New York office," she said, perching on the edge of my desk. "Senior analyst, significant salary increase, opportunity to work with Fortune 500 companies. I'd like to recommend you for the position." New York. The city I dreamed about since college, the place where careers were made and futures were built. A year ago, the offer would have been impossible. I couldn't have afforded the move, couldn't have risked leaving my safety net of family support, couldn't have imagined that I was capable of succeeding at that level. "When would the position start?" I asked. 3 months. That would give you time to wrap up current projects and make arrangements for the move." "I'm interested," I said, the words feeling both thrilling and terrifying. That evening, I called Grandma Liu to share the news. Her excitement was infectious, transmitted across the phone line in rapid-fire Mandarin mixed with English. "New York!" she exclaimed, "the city where dreams come true. Your grandfather and I always wanted to visit New York, but we never had the money or the time. Now you will live there, work there, make your fortune there." It's a big step. I'll be completely on my own, no family support system. "Child," Grandma Liu said, her voice becoming serious, "you have been on your own since the day you decided to fight for your stolen money. Everything else is just geography."
She was right, of course. The physical distance between me and my family was less important than the emotional and financial independence I'd already achieved. Moving to New York wouldn't make me more alone. It would just make my aloneness more obvious to everyone else. The next few weeks flew by in a whirlwind of preparations and final projects. I gave my landlord notice on the apartment, arranged for movers, and began the complex process of transferring my professional life to a new city. Each step felt like shedding another layer of my old identity, the dutiful daughter who prioritized family harmony over personal advancement. A month before my scheduled move, Daniel called. It was our first direct communication since the dinner at my parents' house, and his voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. "Scarlett," he said, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to call before you leave for New York." "How did you know about New York?" "Mom heard it from Mrs. Chen at the grocery store, who heard it from someone at the bank. Small-town news travels fast." I waited for him to continue, not sure what he wanted from this conversation. "I've been going to therapy, court-ordered because of the divorce, but I've been continuing on my own because I think it's helping. And I've been talking about what happened with your money, trying to understand how I justified it to myself." This was new territory for us. Daniel had never been introspective, never been one to examine his own motivations or behavior. The therapy requirement was probably the first time he'd been forced to look honestly at his choices. "What did you discover?" I asked, genuinely curious. "That I've spent my whole life feeling like I was behind, like I needed to catch up to where I thought I should be. And when Jessica and her family came along, it felt like a shortcut to the kind of life I wanted. But I was so focused on looking successful that I didn't think about how to actually be successful. And my money seemed like another shortcut. Yeah, and I told myself it was temporary, that I'd pay you back as soon as I got established. But really, I think I resented that you had savings when I didn't. I resented that you were disciplined enough to build that account while I spent everything I earned trying to keep up appearances." The honesty was startling, both in its depth and its timing. For years, Daniel had deflected criticism and avoided responsibility for his choices. This willingness to acknowledge his resentment and short-sightedness felt like a fundamental shift. "I can't undo what I did, and I understand why you don't want to help me now. But I wanted you to know that I finally get it. I finally understand that what I did wasn't a family financial decision or a temporary borrowing situation. It was theft, plain and simple. And I understand that you can't trust me anymore because of it." "Thank you for saying that," I said, meaning it. The apology wouldn't repair our relationship or erase the months of anguish he caused, but it was the first acknowledgement from any family member that my perspective had been valid all along. "Are you happy?" he asked. "In your new job, with your new life?" I considered the question carefully. Happiness felt too simple a word for what I had achieved. I was satisfied, fulfilled, proud of what I had built from the wreckage of my stolen dreams, but happiness suggested a lightness that I wasn't sure I'd ever fully recover. "I'm content. I'm building something good. I'm glad."
And Scarlett, for what it's worth, I think you were right to fight us on this. I think you were right to hold us accountable. I wish I'd been brave enough to handle things differently from the beginning. After he hung up, I sat in my nearly empty apartment, surrounded by boxes and packing materials, thinking about redemption and forgiveness and the possibility of healing relationships that had been broken by betrayal. Daniel's apology was genuine, but it was also years too late. The person he was apologizing to, the trusting younger sister who would have accepted his promises and excuses, no longer existed. The person I'd become was willing to acknowledge his growth without forgetting the lesson his theft had taught me. That people show you who they are through their actions, especially when they think there will be no consequences. Daniel had shown me that he was willing to steal from family to maintain his image. Mom and Dad had shown me that they would enable his theft and then blame me for demanding accountability. Those revelations had been devastating at the time, but they'd also been liberating.
I no longer had to waste energy wondering whether my family truly supported my dreams or merely tolerated them. I no longer had to navigate the complex emotional terrain of trying to maintain relationships with people who saw me as a resource rather than a person. My last day at the local Goldman and Associates office was marked by a small celebration with my colleagues, people who had become genuine friends over the past months. Dr. Walsh presented me with a leather portfolio engraved with my initials, a symbol of the professional identity I'd built from nothing. "You've been an inspiration to watch," she said as we shared cake in the conference room. "When you started here, you were clearly talented but uncertain about your worth. Now you're confident enough to take on New York. That transformation has been remarkable to witness." That evening, I drove to Grandma Liu's senior community for what might be our last in-person visit for a long time. She was waiting for me in the lobby, dressed in her best outfit and carrying a small wrapped package. "For your new apartment," she said, pressing the package into my hands. Inside was a jade bracelet that had belonged to her mother, passed down through 3 generations of women who had built lives of increasing independence and prosperity. "This is too precious," I protested. "I can't take your mother's bracelet." "My mother gave it to me when I left China," Grandma Liu said firmly. "She said it would remind me to stay strong when things got difficult in the new country. Now, you are going to your new place, your new life. You need this strength more than I do." We had dinner at her favorite restaurant, a small Chinese place where the elderly owner still remembered my grandmother's early days in America, working 16-hour shifts in his kitchen while learning English from soap operas. "Your story gives me hope," the owner said when Grandma Liu proudly told him about my promotion. "So many young people today, they want everything easy, everything given to them. But you worked, you fought, you earned what you have. That's the American way." As we said goodbye in the restaurant parking lot, Grandma Liu held both of my hands in hers, her grip surprisingly strong for someone in her 70s. "Remember, success is not about looking successful to other people. Success is about building something real that belongs to you. You have learned this lesson earlier than I did, earlier than your parents did. That will serve you well." The drive to New York took 8 hours through changing landscapes that felt like a metaphor for the journey I'd taken over the past year. The familiar roads of my hometown gave way to highways I'd never traveled, small cities I'd never seen, and finally the towering skyline of Manhattan, rising from the horizon like a promise made manifest. My new apartment was a studio in Brooklyn, smaller than the place I'd left behind, but with a view of the Manhattan Bridge that made me feel connected to something larger than myself. The furniture was minimal, mostly pieces I'd ordered online and assembled myself, but every item represented a choice I'd made without consulting anyone else's preferences or opinions. The Goldman and Associates New York office occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in Midtown, the kind of building I'd only seen in movies about successful people living successful lives. My new colleagues were brilliant and driven, the kind of professionals who saw challenge as opportunity rather than threat. "Welcome to the big leagues," said Marcus Rodriguez, the senior partner who would be my direct supervisor. "Your reputation preceded you from the regional office. Dr. Walsh speaks very highly of your analytical skills and professional maturity." Professional maturity. The phrase captured something I'd gained through the ordeal with my family. The ability to separate personal emotions from professional decisions, to maintain boundaries even when they cause discomfort, to prioritize long-term success over short-term harmony. My first major project involved analyzing market penetration strategies for a technology company expanding into Asian markets. As I dove into the research, I found myself drawing on cultural insights that I'd gained from conversations with Grandma Liu, understanding market dynamics through the lens of immigrant experiences and generational change. The work was challenging in the best way possible, requiring me to stretch beyond my previous capabilities while building on the foundation of knowledge and confidence I'd developed over the past year. Every successful presentation, every client meeting, every positive feedback session reinforced the truth that I'd been fighting to believe for the past year. I belonged in these spaces not because of family connections or social advantages, but because of my own merit and hard work. 6 months into my New York life, I received an unexpected email from Jessica. The divorce had been finalized, Daniel was living in a small apartment near my parents' house, and she was apparently preparing to move to California to start over with a new identity and a trust fund that would cushion the transition. I know this might seem strange, but I wanted to apologize for my part in what happened with your college savings. At the time, I convinced myself that we were making a strategic family investment, but I realize now that was just a way to avoid acknowledging that we were taking something that didn't belong to us. The apology was more sophisticated than Daniel's, full of therapy language and self-awareness buzzwords, but it also felt more calculated. Jessica was preparing to reinvent herself in a new city, and clearing her conscience about past misdeeds was probably part of her comprehensive rebranding strategy. I hope you can forgive me and that you're finding happiness in your new life, the email concluded. I didn't respond to the email, not because I was angry, but because forgiveness felt irrelevant to my current reality. Jessica and Daniel had taught me valuable lessons about trust and family dynamics, but those lessons were complete now. I didn't need their apologies to move forward, and I didn't need to offer forgiveness to prove that I'd grown beyond their betrayal. A year into my New York experience, I was promoted to senior analyst with a salary that exceeded my parents' combined income. The promotion came with new responsibilities, a corner office, and the kind of professional recognition that opened doors to opportunities I'd never imagined possible. But the success felt different than I had expected when I was a college student dreaming about career advancement. It was satisfying and meaningful, but it was also just one part of a life I was building according to my own values and priorities. The desperate hunger for achievement that had driven me through college had been replaced by a calmer confidence in my ability to create opportunities rather than just responding to them. I was dating someone now, a fellow analyst named David who worked for a competing firm. He was kind, intelligent, ambitious in healthy ways, and completely uninterested in the family drama that once consumed so much of my emotional energy. When I told him the story of my stolen college fund, his response was supportive but uncomplicated. That must have been really difficult, but it sounds like you handled it perfectly. No lectures about family forgiveness, no suggestions that I should have been more understanding of my brother's position, no implications that my success was somehow selfish or came at the expense of family harmony. Just acknowledgement that I'd faced a difficult situation and managed it well. The relationship felt like another piece of evidence that I'd successfully escaped the toxic dynamics of my childhood. I was learning what it felt like to be with someone who saw my success as attractive rather than threatening, who supported my ambitions rather than expecting me to sacrifice them for someone else's comfort. On my second anniversary in New York, I finally called my parents. The conversation was cordial but distant, filled with updates about weather and health rather than the deeper connection we'd once shared. They told me that Daniel was doing better, working as a mechanic at Dad's shop, and slowly rebuilding his life. Mom mentioned that they'd seen Grandma Liu at the grocery store and that she was proud of my success in the big city. "We miss you," Dad said toward the end of the call, his voice carrying a weight that suggested he understood the permanent nature of the distance between us. "I miss parts of what we used to have," I replied honestly, "but I don't miss wondering whether my family truly supported me or merely tolerated me when it was convenient." "We always supported you," Mom said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You supported the version of me that didn't cause problems or make demands, the version of me that accepted whatever scraps of attention and resources were left after Daniel's needs were met. But when I started insisting on equal treatment, that support disappeared pretty quickly." The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of truths that were too uncomfortable to acknowledge directly. "Maybe someday we can rebuild something healthier," I said finally. "But that would require acknowledging what went wrong in the first place, and I'm not sure you're ready for that conversation yet." After we hung up, I sat in my apartment looking out at the lights of Manhattan and thinking about the different kinds of success that were possible in life. There was the success my parents had envisioned for me, professional achievement that reflected well on the family, financial stability that could support aging